Picture this. The year is 1965. America is glued to its television sets. The space race is consuming the national imagination. And a brand new science fiction show is about to change everything. Not because it became the greatest sci-fi series ever made, but because of how wonderfully, gloriously strange it turned out to be. Lost in Space was supposed to be a serious, gripping adventure about humanity's first steps into deep space. What audiences actually got was something far more entertaining, a wild, campy, wonderfully bizarre journey through rubber aliens, recycled props, dramatic robot meltdowns, and one of the most unexpectedly iconic villains in television history. But the real story of Lost in Space isn't the one you watched on screen. The real story happened behind the cameras, in cramped studio sets, budget meetings gone wrong, costume disasters, and casting decisions that accidentally created television history. So buckle up, because today we are counting down 20 of the strangest, most surprising facts about Lost in Space that you almost certainly never knew. Let's go. Before a single frame of Lost in Space was ever filmed, the Robinson family looked and behaved very differently on paper. Early production documents described a household defined less by warmth and more by friction. Characters were designed with harder edges, colder personalities, complicated loyalties, and a family dynamic built on conflict as much as cooperation. The original concept leaned heavily into psychological tension. The idea was that surviving deep space would test not just the family's physical limits, but their relationships with one another. Certain characters were written with dominant authority roles that would clash with others throughout the series. The tone was survival drama first, science fiction adventure second. By the time the pilot was completed and reviewed, producers recognized a problem. The cold, tense version of the Robinsons was not connecting emotionally the way the network needed it to. Television audiences in 1965 were not necessarily looking for psychological complexity. They were looking for characters they could root for together. So the rewrites began. Personalities softened. Dialogue became warmer. The family unit transformed from a stress survival group into something audiences genuinely wanted to invite into their living rooms every week. The end result was a family that felt believable, relatable, and likable, which turned out to be the entire foundation the show needed to survive its increasingly strange later stories. The robot, that beloved, arm-waving, warning-shouting companion, almost looked nothing like the machine audiences grew to love. Early design concepts for the robot leaned in a completely different direction. The original sketches created something angular, cold, and unsettling. The design language was built around sharp metallic edges, dark surface textures, and a facial construction that communicated nothing but a motionless threat. In those early drawings, the robot was not a protector. It was a machine that looked fully capable of causing harm. Standing beside a child character in those design mock-ups, it created a disturbing visual contrast rather than a comforting one. Network executives recognized quickly that this version of the robot would terrify younger viewers rather than fascinate them. The core audience for a family adventure show needed to feel safe with the characters on screen, and a sharp, intimidating war machine did not belong in that category. The redesign focused entirely on approachability. Edges became curves. The body's silhouette grew rounder and less aggressive. Movement patterns were developed to feel almost human, even endearing. The result was a robot that children immediately trusted, a mechanical friend rather than a mechanical threat. That single redesign decision is responsible for one of the most beloved fictional machines in entertainment history. Jonathan Harris, the man who would become the undisputed breakout star of Lost in Space, was originally hired for a very limited engagement. Dr. Z. The Jupiter 2 looked enormous on screen. Control decks, sleeping quarters, scientific equipment, storage corridors. The ship appeared to function as a fully operational home drifting through the cosmos. Audiences watching in 1965 had no reason to doubt that the spacecraft was a genuinely spacious environment. Behind the cameras, the reality was almost comically different. The sets representing the Jupiter 2's interior were squeezed into sound stages with almost no room to spare. Cameras, lighting rigs, electrical cables, prop carts, and actors all competed for the same limited physical space during every single shoot. Moving from one setup to the next required carefully choreographed repositioning of equipment that would have been unnecessary on a larger production. The production team became experts at visual illusion. Walls were designed to be removable, so cameras could achieve angles that made corridors look longer than they were. Lighting was positioned to create depth where very little actually existed. Directors learned exactly which framings made the cramped sets look spacious, and which angles revealed too much. For the actors, it was a daily exercise in patience. Moving naturally through a scene became a technical challenge when cameras were positioned inches away from their faces and cables ran across the floor between every mark. The Jupiter 2 that audiences remember as iconic was, in physical reality, barely large enough to work in. Bob May, the performer inside the robot costume, deserves far more recognition than he typically receives. While the robot became one of the most loved characters on the show, the experience of bringing that character to life involved genuine physical hardship every single day of filming. The costume was heavy, bulky, and built with almost no concession to human comfort. May had to maintain precise, controlled movements while encased in materials that restricted natural motion at every joint. The mechanical appearance audiences admired on screen required constant muscular effort to produce. Each arm movement, each rotation, each carefully timed action demanded deliberate physical work inside a suit not designed for ease. The heat was the worst part. Studio lighting in the 1960s generated significant warmth, and the robot costume absorbed and trapped all of it. Ventilation inside the suit was minimal. Within minutes of filming beginning, temperatures inside the costume reached levels that would be considered unsafe by modern production standards. May performed through considerable discomfort for every scene, every episode, every season. Visibility presented its own challenge. Seeing through the costume's exterior was limited, which meant navigating a set crowded with cameras, cables, props, and fellow actors required extraordinary care. One misstep could damage equipment, injure a colleague, or ruin a take. And then there is this detail. Several of the robot's head movements and mechanical features were operated by separate puppeteers working off-camera simultaneously. The performance audiences watched required coordination between multiple people working in complete synchronization, all while Bob May maintained his physical performance inside the suit. Listen to the Lost in Space theme from the first season, and then listen to the second season theme. They are almost unrecognizable as music from the same program. That shift in sound is one of the clearest documents of what happened to the show during its run. Season 1's theme was cinematic and tense, the kind of music that communicated danger, isolation, and the weight of deep space. It suited a series that was genuinely trying to explore science fiction as drama. Combined with black and white photography and serious storytelling, it created an atmosphere of genuine suspense. By Season 2, the music had transformed entirely. The new theme was bright, energetic, almost celebratory. Music that invited audiences into an adventure rather than warning them about a threat. It suited a show that had decided comedy and spectacle were more important than tension and realism. The music did not change because someone decided to change it. The music changed because the show itself had already changed, and the opening needed to reflect the new identity honestly. In two pieces of music separated by a single season, you can hear the entire story of how Lost in Space evolved, or, depending on your perspective, transformed, from serious science fiction into something completely different. One of the most fascinating things about Lost in Space is that its famous campiness was not a creative decision made in a boardroom. It was the result of gradual drift, a slow accumulation of small choices driven by audience feedback, budget realities, and one actor's magnetic comedic energy. The show launched with legitimate dramatic ambitions. The Robinson family was meant to face real danger, make difficult decisions, and confront the genuine terror of being stranded far from home. Those early episodes, particularly in black and white, carry a tension that the later seasons almost completely abandoned. What changed it was simple. Audiences laughed when they were supposed to, and producers noticed. When Dr. Smith's panic escalated into absurdity, viewers responded. When alien costumes looked ridiculous, audiences seemed to enjoy it rather than be disappointed. The ratings data pointed one direction, and the production followed. Writers began leaning into humor. Stories became more outlandish. Alien characters grew more theatrical. And with each step toward absurdity, the show moved further from its original vision, without anyone ever. The frustration was understandable. Williams had signed on for one kind of show and found himself performing in something else entirely. By the later seasons, viewers who paid attention could see that John Robinson had become largely reactive, present in scenes but rarely driving them. The character who was supposed to anchor the series had been quietly moved to the edges. Among the many creative compromises that defined Lost in Space's production, few were more straightforwardly inventive than the solution to creating an alien companion character. The character of Debbie, presented to audiences as a strange extraterrestrial creature, was in reality a trained chimpanzee wearing a custom-made outfit. The production team designed small futuristic costumes, unusual accessories, and decorative additions to make the animal read as something from beyond Earth. Carefully chosen camera angles and editing helped sell the illusion to home viewers who were not expecting to question what they were seeing. The logic was purely practical. Building a convincing alien creature from scratch required money the production did not have. A trained animal already capable of performing on cue cost significantly less and delivered more reliable results on set. The costume work needed to complete the disguise was minimal compared to the alternative. It worked. Viewers accepted Debbie as part of the show's alien universe without question, and the character developed a genuine following during its appearances. As a piece of creative problem-solving under financial pressure, it was remarkably effective. Week after week, Lost in Space introduced new alien creatures to its audience. Mysterious beings, dangerous monsters, strange entities from across the cosmos. The show maintained a steady supply of extraterrestrial life throughout its run. What viewers at home could not see was how those creatures were constructed. Budget constraints meant the production rarely had resources to invest in sophisticated creature effects. Instead, the team became expert improvisers. Fabric scraps, rubber sheets, plastic components, paint, and leftover costume pieces from entirely unrelated productions were combined, reshaped, and relight into beings from other worlds. Some creatures were primarily actors in unusual masks, with oversized decorative accessories attached. Others were repurposed props dressed in new materials and given movement through puppetry. The alien environments of Lost in Space were built from studio ingenuity rather than studio investment, and the show's fast-paced, visually chaotic presentation helped prevent audiences from examining anything too closely. The Jupiter 2's control panels, scientific instruments, and technological equipment looked impressive enough to suggest genuine futurism. In reality, most of it came from studio storage warehouses, full of props used in previous productions for other studios and networks. The Lost in Space crew raided these collections systematically. Old control panels from other productions were repainted and repositioned. Mechanical components from unrelated films were combined with plastic pieces and lit with flashing bulbs to suggest advanced function. Metal panels that had previously served entirely different narrative purposes were transformed into space-age technology with minimal modification. The approach was efficient and inexpensive. Television in the 1960s moved quickly enough that audiences rarely had time to recognize props from other productions. The visual complexity of the sets, layers of buttons, lights, and surfaces arranged to suggest advanced technology, created a convincing impression that held up perfectly well on the small screens of the era. "Danger, Will Robinson" is one of the most recognizable phrases in science fiction history. It has been quoted in films, television shows, advertisements, and everyday conversation for decades. But the line did not begin with the delivery audiences associate with it today. In the earliest episodes, the robot's voice was calibrated for cold mechanical precision. Warnings were delivered in a flat, technical manner, information being transmitted rather than genuine alarm being expressed. the effect was accurate to how a machine might behave, but dramatically inert on screen. As filming progressed, the production recognized that audiences connected far more powerfully with the robot when it seemed to actually care about Will Robinson's safety. The delivery evolved towards something more urgent, more emotionally charged, more protective. The robot began to sound less like equipment issuing reports and more like a guardian issuing warnings. That shift in vocal performance transformed the relationship between Will and the robot from a boy and his tool into something that felt like genuine friendship. And it turned a warning line into a cultural landmark. It is difficult to fully appreciate Lost in Space without understanding how comprehensively its budget limitations shaped the show's identity. The science fiction genre is expensive to produce under any circumstances, and in the 1960s, the resources available to weekly television productions were nowhere near adequate for the ambitions the creators originally held. Sets were reused constantly, dressed differently between episodes to suggest new locations. Costumes were recycled with minor modifications. Visual effects shots were borrowed from earlier episodes when producers believed audiences would not notice. The alien worlds the Robinson family visited were often the same studio backlit areas dressed with different colored lighting and rearranged props. Paradoxically, these limitations contributed to the show's distinctive character. The visible cheapness of certain elements became part of Lost in Space's charm in retrospect. The delightful artificiality of its universe, the rubber monster suits, the obviously repainted control panels. What was born from financial necessity became part of the show's identity. When Star Trek premiered in September 1966, Lost in Space had already been on the air for a full year. For a brief period, the two most significant science fiction shows in American television history occupied the same cultural moment simultaneously, and the competition between them was genuine. Network executives watched ratings closely. Producers in both camps were aware